Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Roundup. So, for today's news, several companies are pulling their events for fairly obvious reasons. Ubisoft have tried to let slip a bizarre subscription model into a long-awaited reboot. We've got Strauss Zelnick, right, a key supporter of Stadia in the early days, actually kind of taking aim at them, and a whole bunch of other stories as well. So, that's what to expect for today's video. I hope you enjoy it, and with that said, let's get stuck in. Well, the situation in the USA is obviously dire, and with it being such a strong cultural focus, multiple games companies have decided that it is really not the time for their big announcements. What that has meant is that Activision have postponed new content for Modern Warfare, Warzone, and COD Mobile. EA have delayed the reveal of the next Madden game, saying that it is not the time for football, and Sony have just postponed their reveal event for their PS5 lineup. Those are major delays, yes, and overall I do think it's the right call for those companies to make. I think that now is just not the time for those big announcements. Now, even aside from the sort of discussion of appropriateness, I think pragmatically it is also just a really bad time for those, for them companies to be making those big announcements. Additionally, then, I suppose that by virtue of these being digital events, it will be a lot easier for the companies to delay them. Much of this is just pre-recorded video content, and that will make the decision far easier because it won't be an E3-like situation of having a big physical press conference being planned. So look, there's it as it pertains to the games industry. What's going on is clearly a lot bigger than games, though. I'm not in the US, right? I'm from Northern Ireland. I don't really know much about American culture. I don't pay attention to it. I don't know what life there is like. So in response to this happening, what I'm doing is trying to listen and to learn. And while there are similarities to my country of Northern Ireland's history of rubber bullets and profiling, it's clear there also are differences, and I don't want to wade into a situation irresponsibly and in an uninformed manner. So look, that's what's going on there. This is obviously important. We are going to move on in this video and cover, other industry news. But yeah, do know that I do understand that this is an important thing, and I am paying attention to it and trying to learn. Last week, Ubisoft announced a rather curious pricing scheme for their upcoming Trackmania Nations reboot, and it really is bizarre. So, the base game is free to play, right? But full access to the track editor, which is a massive part, it's basically the part of Trackmania's appeal, well, that will cost $10 a year. Then, club access, which includes things like league racing and exclusive skins, that costs $30 a year, or $60 for 3 years. Sounds awfully like a subscription, doesn't it? A lot of fans agree. Many are complaining that they would have just, preferred the older way of Trackmania, which is that you bought the game and then it was yours. Ubisoft, though, have since responded, saying that it's not a subscription model at all, that you're just paying to access the game for a specific period of time. So what, does that mean that it's not auto-recurring, and that's what they mean, even though essentially you're a customer, you want those features, so you essentially do need to do a recurring payment? Yeah, I think their not a subscription model statement really is not particularly useful there. Now, there's also some conflicting messages about what is included in the free version. Different messages from Ubisoft have the track editor listed under both the free and $10 tiers. It's just all a bit of a mess, but I suppose kudos to the fans who are not letting this bizarre monetization model skate by unnoticed. It's certainly an interesting situation, I would say, where much of the value of these games, of Trackmania, that comes from fans taking the game's tools and making cool levels. So I guess that by charging effectively a subscription, Ubisoft are actually attempting to monetize the long tail appeal of that game, even though they, of course, are not the ones who are creating the content there. It almost feels like more of a Mario Maker situation where the longevity of the game comes from the community making stuff. Over now, of course, right, those, all that content that gives those games their longevity, that is made with tools that Ubisoft, have provided, right, and created. So I do think that them having long tail monetization in that product is okay, but I think perhaps this particular way of doing it is a bit much. Either way, though, it's a pretty bad look, especially in comparison to the past of that franchise. Last May, Take-Two CEO Strauss Zelnick stated that he was, quote, pretty optimistic about Google Stadia. At the time, he called the possibility of being able to stream games on devices around the world with low latency very compelling as a proposition. But now, like the rest of the world, Strauss seems to have adjusted his thinking. He acknowledged in an interview last week that Stadia has had a slow launch, with customers actually being disappointed by Google's, quote, over-promising, I mean, yeah, if one of your partners said that you overpromised, that's a pretty damning thing. So yes, that customers are disappointed by Google overpromising the tech, right? Like more than they could actually deliver. And while other big publishers have somewhat just avoided the platform and stayed quiet, Take-Two supported Stadia well from day one, with the likes of Red Dead Redemption 2 and Borderlands 3 being on the platform now, with more games coming like down the line. But nonetheless, Zelnick admitted that Stadia is having minimal impact on Take-Two's baseline sales. He said that anyone who wants to play the games can already play them, and that streaming them isn't really, quote, that big of a deal. It's a pretty damning thing for one of your partners to say about your streaming service. Now, continuing to catch up the rest of the industry's thinking, Zelnick also wonders whether anybody willing to pay $60 for a game would be unwilling to pay $300 for a console. And we've long stated that Stadia's ideal customer, right, somebody who wants to play these games, has incredible, great internet, that person doesn't want a console. Like, that person doesn't exist, right? Who really wants to play these games, has incredible internet, and just isn't going to get a console? That's barely anybody, right? So the core market of Stadia is tiny. Them as some sort of budget-friendly proposition is also completely ridiculous when you think broader about their business model, the way you've got to pay for the games, the way that, the more expensive internet's going to cost you money, and that it is just such a bad deal for the customer. It seems like a lot of people intuitively know that because they look at Stadia, they think, even if they don't think deeply about it as a business model, they look at it and they think, oh, that's not for me. So I suppose it's nice to see the likes of Zelnick, true titans of the industry when you really get down to it, actually be candid about the reality of this situation. The next up, we got a nice story, really in line with something we do like to cover on this channel, and that is fans fixing things. So, issues have plagued Phantasy Star Online 2 since its official PC release, and much of it was down to the Windows Store. But never fear, because the game's dedicated modding community has actually came to the rescue. So, the popular PSO2 tweaker tool, which has helped fans across the world access the Japanese version of the game for years, that's now compatible with the official version. Now, the tool essentially replaces the game's standard launcher and updater, which actually were what caused many of the bugs. The devs are also working on further updates to the tool, including a way to bypass the Windows Store altogether, which I think is a very good thing in general. Though, of course, that will be challenging because of the Microsoft, just their integration, right, with Phantasy Star 2. Anyway, Microsoft are also working on a fix for the problems, but in the meantime, this does remain yet another instance of something that's always pretty cool to see. Fans succeeding where the official release has failed. Hideo Kojima has been in the news over the weekend, and it actually feels like a while since we've really heard much from him, and it's pretty interesting. So, he said that he considers Death Stranding sales and performance to be an overall success. The studio have recouped their development costs, and that's even with the PC release still being on the horizon. And I suppose the PC release is probably where, I'm going to pick that up and properly give it a, sort of proper good run for its money, I suppose. But yeah, even with that, they're still doing well. They've got enough funds to begin work on their next project. They are hard at work on that next title, though Kojima was, of course, tight-lipped about what it actually was. Instead, though, he lamented that a major project was recently cancelled, admitting that he's feeling pretty pissed at the decision. And that's an interesting thing, because sometimes in a position like Kojima's, you're going to be so sad and maybe even angry that the right decision is to cancel a project, especially when you know that so many of your staff have really put a lot of their, even just emotionally, they care about it. But sometimes the right decision is to cancel it. And in this case, I suppose the situation is that the cancellation of that major project, while sad, is going to be what will eventually allow the next Kojima Productions game to actually come out. So there you go, an update on what is going on with Kojima Productions. Next up, a 76 update. So last year, the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission ruled that anybody who purchased Fallout 76 was entitled to a refund. It's pretty major. Now, the game's broken launch state was rather famous around the world, but in Australia, the consumer protection laws actually provide a lot of protection for instances of faulty or damaged products, which did include 76. This week, local retailer EB Games, who are owned by GameStop, also admitted that they, quote, likely misled customers about their customer guarantee rights, which is pretty wild for a thing to do, where they basically told customers that they were not entitled to a refund. So, there you go. Anybody who contacted EB Games during the launch window is now going to be eligible for a refund, and they just need to get in touch by an August deadline. So, if you got 76, you're now going to be taken care of, if, of course, that was a purchase that you ended up regretting. The next up, Last of Us 2 Part 2 news. We are just a few weeks away from its release, and, well, there's a lot of interesting news to talk about. So over the weekend, it was shared that the pre-orders for The Last of Us 2 are tracking above what Spider-Man had at the same point in its launch window. I think that's actually very interesting, and I also think it does make a decent amount of sense. The Last of Us 2 is a sequel, right, to a beloved game, and yes, the leaks happen, but many people will be pre-ordering based on that alone. Whereas for Spider-Man, I mean, that was really a reboot of Spider-Man video games, and I think a lot of why that game did well is because it got in people's hands and they almost immediately realized it was an excellent game, and then of course that led to more and more people purchasing it and it being very, very successful indeed. Now, Sony have also stated that they hope that The Last of Us 2 will be a, quote, defining game for this generation, and I suppose with numbers like these pre-orders, they could be onto something. I mean, Spider-Man, which was also a PS4 exclusive and one of the best games of 2018, that sold more than 13 million copies to date. I would say that in spite of the leaks, The Last of Us 2 is still almost certainly going to sell excellently. It is interesting when you tie it into what we'd said about the lower social numbers from last week, where there's just going to be a lot more, I think, of The Last of Us audience who will be a bit more silent on social media because of things like spoilers, especially in a universe where Sony have been pumping out trailer after trailer after trailer, and people really don't want those spoilers. So yeah, I think that's really what was going on with the sort of social numbers. The pre-orders are still strong. I suppose we'll just have to see what actually happens when the critical, when the critics weigh in, when the fan reviews weigh in, right? When that stuff happens, that is going to be what impacts the long tail sales of this game beyond just its initial window, where it's going to be selling, a lot because of hype and brand name and people's investment in those characters. Certainly, though, it's an interesting situation, and I suspect that I will play it for review purely because I really did like the first game, and as for the second one, I mean, covering it, for the leaks and all of that stuff, I am genuinely interested to see if they're able to pull it off. I do have severe doubts that they'll be able to pull it off, but I suppose it'll be interesting to find out, and I think after covering the leaks, that the right thing to do is then to actually go and see what's going on when the game actually comes out. So, there you go, that's that story, and next up, well, something that I'm pretty excited about. Baldur's Gate 3, I think it looks incredible, and it is, of course, slated to enter early access this year, but we haven't really known a whole lot about it. Well, developers Larian Studios dropped a new teaser over the weekend, and they announced that they will be revealing more details about the game throughout this month. Now, the first reveal is supposedly coming June 6th as a part of the Guerrilla Collective showcase, though I think obviously tying into the first story of today's video, I wouldn't be surprised if there was any form of delay or something like that going on. Putting that aside for a second, though, certainly I think that game looks incredible. I think Larian are an incredible studio, and this is likely one of the games I'm the most excited about. So, roll on more Baldur's Gate 3 news, and finally, let's kick it over to the Epic Games Store. So, Tim Sweeney has taken to Twitter and said that devs are seeing better sales for their games after their games have become free on the Epic Store. He said that fans being able to try a new game for free has sparked genre interests and inspired additional sales as a result. Now, sadly, he didn't mention any specifics here. And that's a bit sad because those specifics might have actually backed up his claims, but he is adamant that developers have seen increased sales across Steam and consoles after Epic raises the awareness. So that's what's going on. I would imagine that would certainly be the case on consoles, right? If, just a game is being talked about way more than somebody who can't play it in PC. Well, the only thing they can do is play it on a console. As for Steam sales bumping up, I mean, I suppose we'll just have to take Tim's word for it. I can't imagine it's a massive bump, but there you go. That's what he said. I suppose I'll kick it over to you. Is there any game that you have purchased on Steam after it going free on the Epic Games Store? If so, let me know, though I guess it does seem a bit confusing because if a game's going for free, why would you just not pick it up for free? Yeah, a bit odd. Let me know if you've experienced that, I suppose. And with that, that's the games industry news for today. Obviously, just a generally rough situation in the world, I suppose, so all I can really say is, pay attention to what's going on, be kind to each other in the comments, and, we'll just have to try to take everything that, we all say in a good faith manner, and, just try to make the world a better place via the small actions that we can do and the things that, we can do in our own lives. I suppose that's It's most of what I can say, and as for me, as I said, there's a lot to think about, a lot to keep tabs on. I certainly will be doing that. I suppose just to leave it, I'm going to throw it to you. What do you think about today's stories? Do let me know in that comment section. Thank you for watching this video, and I will see you next time.